Hey, third grade mathematicians. I am so excited today to continue our discussion about data and ways that we can display data. In our last lesson, we learned about a new way to display data using line plots. And so we're going to continue that discussion today. And so before we get started with the lesson, we're going to review our math focus points, okay? So our math focus points for today is we're working on using a line plot to represent ordered numerical data. So with bar graphs and pictographs, we were using categorical data where we had categories. With line plots, we're going to be using numerical data, measurements, number of something. Our second math focus point is describing the shape of ordered numerical data. So looking at the shape once we have our data represented in the line plot and looking at where we have the most data, the least data, and how the data is shaped. We're also going to be continuing to work on interpreting what the numbers and symbols on a line plot mean. Okay, so what we're going to do is I've already collected some data for this activity with my students. So we're going to go to the data that I collected, and the question that I posed to them was, how many years have you been at this school? Okay, so we're going to work on putting the number of years, putting the data on the line plot. So when you're creating a line plot, the most important thing to do is to take time to analyze it. What do the numbers mean? How am I going to display this data? Okay, so I'm looking at the data here, and just take a moment and look at the question. How many years have you been at this school is the question I asked my students, and these were their answers. So when I'm creating a line plot, I want to note what the numbers are and what they mean. That goes to that third math focus point of interpreting what the numbers and symbols mean. So down below, it's already labeled here that we are putting the number of years in this school. So I noticed that my data, the highest number is 5 and the lowest number is 1. So I am going to go ahead and I'm going to put those numbers in here. Okay. So remember, the numbers represent the number of years at school. And we decided that even though this may be your first year at school, we counted it as 1. Even though it's not 1 full year, you are in your first year. Okay. All right, so we have our numbers labeled at the bottom, and so we're going to work on putting the data into the line plot. One thing that makes it easier for me, that once I add the data, I mark off the number. So I'm just going to work on, or I'm going to just fill the background in after I put the symbol in, okay? All right, so I'm going to put the data. So the first one, years, was 1. Okay. Then the second one was 1. And something to note too, I know it's easier to make it even when it's on the computer, but I know when we were studying pictographs, my students and I discussed how important it was to try to make the symbols as close to the same size. That way it's easier to compare. Okay. So I'm going to continue putting this data into the line plot. Goodness, this shape is kind of funny right now. We're at both ends of the spectrum here. My students and I like to talk about, why are we studying this in math? And it's because you can tell a lot about people in schools and interests of different groups of people by using and looking at data and solving problems with data. I also think it's important, I know you're sitting watching me make this line plot, but I think it's important to watch the process of how to create a graph, just so you don't miss any step. Now we're getting some data in other places. Okay. All right, one more. All right, so our data is on the line plot. So take a minute and analyze what the line plot can tell us about my class and how many years they have been at their school. And remember, analyze, we talk about in my class that means to study and really learn from. So take just a minute and analyze the line plot. As you are analyzing, think about, what does the X's stand for? What does each of the X's stand for? You're right, it stands for one student. So one X represents one student. Okay? So what do the numbers mean at the bottom? You're right, it tells us on the line plot the numbers represent the numbers of years in this school. Okay? So what is the least number of years that a student has been at the school? What is the least number of years that a student has been at this school? You're right, 1. The question was asking about the numbers of years, and the least numbers of years that a student has been is 1 year. Okay? What is the greatest number of years someone has been at this school? You're right, 5, because again, the question was asking about number of years, and so 5 is the greatest number of years that someone has been at this school. Okay? So where do you see a lot of data? I see it too, right here on 5. There are a lot of students that have been here for 5 years, and that's great. That means we have kept a lot of our students in the same school. We actually have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 students that have been at our school for 5 years in 3rd grade. Where do you see the least amount of data? You're right. At the number 1 and 3 number of years. Both of those have 3 people each, and that's the least amount of people. So since the question is asking about people or students, I'm looking at the data, looking at the X's. Okay, so make sure that number 3 math focus point is so important to be able to interpret what the numbers mean and what the symbols mean. Okay, that's going to come in it's going to be very helpful when we come to answering questions. Okay, so what we're going to do now, you are going to have time to work on pages 93 and 94. It's another set of data of how many years Mrs. G's grade 5 class has been in their school. So if you will take a moment or several moments you're going to be creating a line plot with that data and answering questions of what you can say about Miss G's data. And so we'll come back together and we'll discuss what we find out, okay? All right, 3rd grade, happy analyzing graphs.